parents being prepared, researching in advance is so important because in that moment, you don't want to think about it. You want to have your emergency list ready with the weight of your baby, your allergies of your baby. You want to be ready with your emergency list. And then you want to know when to go to the hospital, when to call your pediatrician, when to go to the ER. And you just want to know in advance and prepare. And of course it shouldn't be like this. Every ER should be prepared for every child. Of course, that is why our baby exists, and hopefully we will, create this change. But until then, it is important to research your ERs.
The content in this episode is intended for informational purposes only and is not medical advice. We are not medical experts. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional for personalized guidance. Hey, Mama. Welcome to the Working Moms Playbook, the go-to podcast for moms balancing careers and babies. I'm your host, Antonia DePace, former editor, current marketing maven, and mom of one. Each week, we're breaking down the systems, mindsets, and support every working mom needs to thrive, whether it be at work, at home, or everywhere in between. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Working Moms Playbook. This week's episode is, in my opinion, incredibly pivotal for all moms, not just the working mom. Today, we are sitting down with Phyllis Rabinowitz of the Our Baby Foundation. After losing her 9-year-old daughter, Rebecca, to a misdiagnosis in an unprepared emergency room in 2006, Phyllis transformed devastating grief into a national movement. To date, the foundation has invested over $18 million towards making ERs safer and has trained over 7,500 medical staff so that any baby can have a better chance at survival. Phyllis and the foundation have been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Yahoo Parenting, and so much more, getting this important message out there and continuing to grow a better system for parents and babies. Welcome, Phyllis. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me and for highlighting this important issue that affects all families.
It is so important. And as a first-time mom, there's so many worries that happen and there's so much preparing that goes on that thinking of, you're always nervous and scared of the what ifs and what could happen, especially when you bring your baby home for the first time and you're like, ooh, the hospital is no longer watching my child 24/7. But you don't think about the fact that the ER that you're taking your baby to could possibly not be ready for that medical situation. And that, as a first-time mom, when I heard your story, was scary and shocking to me. I never realized that was even like any kind of issue. Why is this such a big gap? Why is the readiness for pediatric ER cases such an issue?
I would say the biggest reason that it's an issue is because there's no federal mandate for it. And there's also,
Interesting.
like you alluded to, that there's not a ton of awareness. So there's not then a lot of parental demand for it either.
Mm-hmm.
However, I will say that it's very well documented in the medical community in the last 30 years that this is an issue, that we do have a D+ rating for ERs in our country, that many ERs are prepared. That's 80% of ERs aren't fully prepared. And I'm just starting with statistics because they are alarming and they're
Yeah.
really, and I'm not saying this to scare any parents or any parents. I'm saying this to be informed because it can result in many deaths. 2,100 pediatric lives are lost each year due to unprepared ERs. So it's shocking. And I think because people don't know that, they're not thinking about it, they're not demanding for it, and because there's no federal mandate, no one specific government agency or regulatory body like enforcing that it's every ER is ready, that's why this is an issue. And like you, I always assumed that, every ER would be ready or every ER is the same, and they are not. ERs are not created equal. There are varying degrees of preparedness, and that means training, that means equipment, that means supplies. There's actually a 3-page checklist guideline prepared by the pediatric experts in EMSC, which is a government agency who's doing a wonderful job proving that these guidelines save lives. So we do have a cost-effective, proven solution to solve this issue of 2,100 children dying each year in unprepared ERs.
Is there a list available that highlights those hospitals or ERs that are pediatric ready?
So there's a national pediatric readiness project, and they do have transparency by state what the score is by state. It hasn't
Okay.
drilled down to the hospital level, but what parents can do, which is, the biggest point I'd want to get across today, is research your ER in advance. And we research our schools and our cars, and we research everything. But unfortunately, like you said, and I also 20 years ago when I lost my daughter, didn't realize you have to research your ER. But even the ER I took my daughter to had a pediatric emergency sign on it, but there's no
Yeah.
definition of what a pediatric emergency room is. You really have to drill down and research and ask the questions. Do you have a pediatric care coordinator in your ER that makes sure that you guys are following the guidelines? That's one question to ask, asking your pediatrician in advance what hospital they're comfortable you taking your child in an emergency. Obviously, in times of breathing issues, you go to the closest hospital, but as time allows, you want to go if they're more prepared for children because, as I've stated, the statistics prove that the outcome is better if you go to a pediatric ER.
It's incredibly I live in South Jersey, so right where I am, there's plenty of hospitals, like, on every corner. If I turn right, there's a few. If I turn left, there's a few. I go straight, there's a few. As important as it is, it's incredibly almost overwhelming to think about having to research which hospital or which ER you go to because, like you said, it can just have a pediatric ER sign on the
So
front.
imagine how you'd feel in a crisis. That's why
Yeah.
preparedness, of parents being prepared, researching in advance is so important because in that moment, you don't want to think about it. You want to have your emergency list ready with the weight of your baby, your allergies of your baby. You want to be ready with your emergency list. And then you want to know when to go to the hospital, when to call your pediatrician, when to go to the ER. And you just want to know in advance and prepare. And
Mhm.
of course, it shouldn't be like this. Every ER should be prepared for every child. Of course, that is
Right.
why our baby exists, and hopefully we will, you know, create this change. But until then, it is important to research your ERs.
So then, of course, our baby came from an experience of immense tragedy and grief. And I think for those who are not familiar with your story, it would be good for you to tell a bit more about your experience with Rebecca and what led to the creation of our baby.
Sure. July 13th, 2006, my daughter Rebecca was born, beautiful, completed our family. I actually had an older child, Sydney, at the time, who was 1.5. We brought her home from the hospital full of hope and dreams, of course. And then the next day that we brought her home, unfortunately, she had very concerning symptoms. She had labored breathing. She sounded like an 8-year-old man with asthma. We were just very concerned because she wasn't eating. She
Okay.
seemed really lethargic. It was enough that we called our pediatrician and he gave us certain things to do. But then he said, if you're really worried, go to the ER. So we did. We did rush to the ER. And this is again one that had a sign that was a pediatric ER. We later found out that there's no guideline to that definition of that. But we were met with doctors that were pretty dismissive. They said, let me get to the real emergency down the hall. She's fine. She just has a common cold. And I'm like, yeah, I know my child. We tried to plead with them, but you want to believe them. You want to believe that, and like you said, like you don't believe it can happen to you. So you want to believe, and they said your daughter's healthy. I was like, okay. So we brought her back home. And then unfortunately the next morning she was crying inconsolably. And we had to call again. We called 911 this time. They came with the ambulances and unfortunately she passed away there. And we did an autopsy at state hospital and we later found out she had enteroviral infection, which is important just to talk about because the crux of the issue is that babies aren't many adults. So it's a totally separate field of medicine. That's why babies go to pediatricians and not internists. That is why this issue exists. Their bodies don't have an immune system yet, so they can't fight off a virus the way adults could. So We talked to another hospital after this happened, and they said, well, if your daughter was 9 days old and she had a common cold, she would have been readmitted in our hospital and given supportive care because she doesn't have the immune system. So there was a different standard of care that we didn't even know existed. Uh, there, again, varying degrees of how do you know when a baby's really sick or not, because babies aren't many adults. They actually require different supplies and equipment and, as I mentioned, training on how to really diagnose what's going on. That was a nightmare, obviously, losing a child is a nightmare, but the fact that it can be preventable, it's beyond tragic, and it's an understatement. She would have been 20 years old this year, and there are still systemic issues in America making sure that every ER is ready for children. So that is what drives me to prevent this from happening to another family.
Yeah, and you've of course balanced that with your own grief and managing when things feel really heavy, especially when you have our baby, right? It's constantly something that you're working on and a mission that you're constantly working towards to make these ERs safer for pediatric cases. When things start to feel really heavy for you, what is something that keeps you going?
A few things pop in my head, actually. One thing is that our programs are saving lives. So what Our Baby does is we fund children's hospitals that train non-children's hospitals. Top line, we do like simulation training programs to make sure doctors are prepared for how babies would react in different scenarios. Sepsis training, we do online training. We funded EMT, like pre-hospital training. We've done equipment funding. So our programs save lives, and that is something that definitely keeps me going. And we've spoken to the doctors that have gone to our training and have said like it's making us more competent and confident. And we've never been turned away from a hospital for this trainings, which also keeps me going that there is such a need. It's working. I mean, there's still clearly a federal mandate that's needed. Like I'm a private citizen. I shouldn't be doing this, but that's what drives me to answer your question. Our programs are life saving. And, frankly, my other three children keep me going. My daughter didn't get her chance to live. I always think of that saying YOLO, like you only live once, and she didn't have her chance to live. So I want to also keep going, that my other children know that you have to live a full life. And that's what I'm trying to do so other families don't have to go through this tragedy.
Did you start it immediately after, or how quickly did you start it after Rebecca's
Yeah,
passing?
my husband was definitely a force to be reckoned with when everything first happened. I couldn't really function very well. So we both immediately researched and knew there was an issue, but he was able to quickly put together a board and fundraise quickly. And then I joined and we created a medical advisory board and we did an event and it was within 3 or 4 months. Yeah. I mean, when you see like a wrong in the world, you like, and you feel it with every bone in your body, you just have to, it's what drives us to make it right.
Yeah, and you guys have made a tremendous difference, of course, based on the stats that I mentioned earlier. But are there any other differences between pre our baby world, right, and today's world when it comes to pediatric ER and readiness? What are some of those differences that you see right now that give you towards that better and more secure future as pediatric cases that come in?
I think I mentioned the EMSC innovation group who is really at the forefront of creating these guidelines that we are trying to get federally to be a mandate. But they have created this checklist and this guideline to make it very clear exactly how an ER can be ready. They've also done the research that has tied the lack of preparedness to the deaths. Like when this all happened 20 years ago, yeah, it was well documented that ERs aren't fully ready, but no one really understood the impacts. And now you can say, if you follow these guidelines, we can save 2,000 children a year, which is like 40,000 children that could have been saved these last 20 years. So it drives me crazy, but it gives me hope now that we have this research. I mean, every top pediatric expert I have talked to believes in making this happen and mandating it. Just like trauma centers are, you go to a trauma center, you know that they are regulated and they are going to have exactly what they say. It's the same as any ER that says that they can treat children and they're not turning them away should be prepared for that. So it gives me hope now that there's research backing it, that this group has a cost effective proven solution. So it's almost like, hey, what we're trying to do with our BEPA bill and law on the Hill is just, say that we have a win for America right now. We can save children with a cost-effective proven solution. So how great would that be if you knew that you could do that? So we're trying to work with legislators and make this a reality. So I'm hopeful. I see change in the future, a bigger change in the process. We're continuing our life-saving grant work because it's still needed, but it is a band-aid, and we do need a mandate. We do need change, like national change.
Yeah. And of course, it all on that level, of course, makes a huge difference because it all plays a part. But then the first step really is for parents, and knowledge is power and education is key. And as we spoke about earlier, doing the research to find out which ERs around you are pediatric ready if you have to go into the ER with your child is of the utmost importance. So let's start with that 911 call. In your opinion, what should parents first say in those first critical moments that could actually impact the care that they receive for their child in that emergency situation?
Preparation, 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 research, research, research before you have to take your kid to the ER. So know where you're going before. So that is the biggest advice. As far as the 911 call, I think that, you should be aware. This is my opinion. I think everyone should talk to the pediatrician about this question too, but is knowing everything there is to know about your baby. That's why we have an emergency list on our website. Like, so you have the weight, you have the shots they've had, you've had the allergies, you're prepared, and you're about, everything about your child to be able to communicate what's going on and what their background is. If there is a breathing issue, clearly you go to the closest ER. If time allows and you feel like it's something that you can drive them yourself, then you go to a pediatric ready ER. And I forgot to mention there is an app right now. It's called Find ER Now. We've partnered in the past with Harvard. It's called EMNet, the group. They have asked, it's self-reported, but if you go on the app, they answer questions, and if they're not pediatric ready, they won't have a baby icon next to it. So that's also something that you can do in advance to research. As far as the first 911 call, and as soon as you're with the ER doctors, I think it's really critical to trust your gut. You know your child better than anyone. I think that you can always ask for a second opinion. It's really important. Parents don't think they can challenge doctors. And this is no like anti-doctor podcast. Like I love like all the doctors on our medical advisory board. I love my own pediatrician. This is just working together with the medical community to make sure they hear you, make sure that they're hearing your concerns, and oh, maybe we can ask for a second opinion if there's a pediatric specialist in this area. It's a really collaborative medicine, and if you're not comfortable, you should always ask for a second opinion, and you should always trust your gut.
Yeah. And for those listening, I will link that app that Phyllis just mentioned in the show notes for easy accessibility because I believe everybody should take a look at that. I know I will be after this recording, after this interview. When it comes to actually getting to the ER, are there questions that a parent can ask to the medical staff there that can help to give a better sign as to whether or not that ER is pediatric ready or not?
I would research in advance and call
Yeah.
or go there, like same way you go to a car dealership, or a school, and just say, number one, what is your pediatric ready score? Ask them. You want to score, obviously you want to score 100 or 90 or above. But again, we rank D plus, so many hospitals are 60, 70. So you want to know what their score is. If they don't have that readily available, one indicator is something called a PEC. It's a pediatric emergency care coordinator, which is
Okay.
what a person that is in charge of making sure that the ER is pediatric ready. So you can ask if they simply have a PEC. That is one indicator that they could be with pediatric ready. Pediatric emergency training isn't required, unfortunately. So you can also ask if they do ongoing training in advance.
Okay.
Again, you can ask your pediatrician where they recommend to go. You can check the app. Unfortunately, that's all you can do at this point is research that way and, ask for specialists if they have them. Not every ER is going to have them, but you can always ask. Until we make this change, this is the issue.
Having that readiness and preparation from prior research, as you mentioned, is certainly something that can help in those situations. But then also knowing those questions to ask once you get there, regardless of whether or not you've done that research, is certainly helpful as well. Because it puts you in a little bit more of an authority to
Mm.
over your child's care.
Yeah, and, like, hearing us speak right now, like, this is a national crisis. This is alarming, right? This
Yeah,
is unacceptable. So, I hope, like, parents wanna not just advocate for their own child, but they wanna, spread the word and talk to their friends about this issue and their pediatrician and really help us make change because it's really unacceptable. It's really I mean, there's nothing
it
that I
is.
do that's gonna bring my daughter back, but, like, and I know every ER doctor, I'm sure is wonderful that and um, they are trained like 0 to 21 years old to manage kids. So it's not a doctor issue again. It's a system issue because they aren't required for ongoing training. They don't see children as frequently as maybe as some children's hospitals. Like let's say they're in a rural ER hospital. So they just don't have the experience and the ongoing experience. So this is a system wide issue, not like, again, a personal doctor issue. So it's
Right.
really about getting the system in America changed. That is very alarming. And I feel like saying that we're D plus, it sounds like it's risky to take your child to an ER. And I'm saying like it kind of is. So it's
Yeah,
terrible.
it
It's
sounds it's
terrible. It's
bad.
yeah. So you know, it's researching, it's advocating, it's helping us make change. Let's do this.
Every single parent should be advocating, like you said, not just for their own child, but for all the children out there because it is unacceptable. When it comes to the work that you've done over the past 20 years, what has been the biggest surprise that you've experienced from the impact of our baby, whether it be from families, hospitals, or even policymakers?
Actually, all 3 have surprised me. So, number 1, it surprised me that no hospitals ever turned down our training. So, there is definitely a need there for continuing pediatric emergency training because it's not mandated, so the hospitals aren't always funding it. So, the fact that no one's turned it down, that's surprised me. It surprised me that many families don't know about this issue because it's well documented in the medical community. And even if they have heard, like, a little bit about it, they just never think it can happen to them. I didn't think it could happen to me. Just my knowledge and where I lived and everything, but it could happen to anyone anywhere, and it doesn't discriminate. So the fact that a lot of parents aren't aware of this national crisis surprised me. And then I think the biggest surprise to me is that we have cost-effective, proven guidelines that can save 2,100 children a year, and it's not being enforced. Is why we need the change. So that's my biggest surprise. It's almost like every cause is important, but I kind of always relate to pediatric cancer because it's around the same amount of children, unfortunately, that pass away each year. But we have a cure, and they're both equally important and should have the same resources. But we have a cure. So imagine if there was a cure for like, an issue and they're not being given it.
Right.
So I think that's my biggest surprise is that it's not being enforced.
It's frustrating. It's a surprise and it's incredibly frustrating, especially as parents in this day and age, we lack so much support already in so many ways. And in the one way where it is almost of the utmost importance, helping to keep your child alive and healthy during an emergency situation, to not always have full 100% A plus access to that support is incredibly frustrating. Hopeful to know that there's progress being made in that direction, but it is frustrating that it is something that even needs to have progress made on.
Agree.
What is the best way for families to support our baby's mission, or how can they get involved?
I mean, first and foremost, definitely advocate for your own child every day, everywhere. So, advocating for your own child. Spread the awareness of what you've heard today, talking to your friends and your pediatrician and talking about this issue. Follow us on social media, maybe invite other people to follow us at Our Baby Foundation on Instagram and Facebook. You can always donate at our website to, literally save lives and improve the care of children. We have a gala in New York City in October that happy for people to attend and learn more and join us in this mission. And hopefully soon we will have this DECA bill out that people can support for the federal mandate of this change.
Sentence. What is something that every mom deserves to hear when it comes to advocating for her child?
Trust your gut. You know your child best. Ask for a second opinion if you're uncomfortable.
And Rebecca's legacy in one word. It's hard. I feel like there's multiple words.
Yeah, I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but I say inspirational because she inspired us to create our baby and to work daily to prevent other tragedies. She's inspired others to create other change that I've been told through the story. She's driving transformative change. She's my guiding light. She'll always be my daughter, but she's a true inspiration.
And she has clearly touched so many lives through the mission and through the foundation. And that in itself is just something to be so proud of as a mom, one mom to another. I thank you for everything that you're doing because, like I said, I never would have known. If we didn't connect, I truly never would have known. And I pray that I never have to be in that type of situation. But I do know that I will be ready and educated if I am. Phyllis, thank you so much. This has been, of course, and I find such impact in the fact that this is on that 20th-year mark on reviewing all of the difference that you've made. And I can't wait for you to continue to make a difference and to continue to be a loud voice in a problem that needs to be solved. And I hope that other parents listening as well and other moms listening are inspired to take action and to become more prepared. I know I am. I know it's going on my to-do list to do more research about the ERs in my area and to get that to-go kit of everything that my son has had for medical care, so that everything is prepared and ready to go in the case that something could happen. So thank you so, so much for coming on. And then for those listening, if you liked the episode, if you have questions for Phyllis, if you have thoughts, comment below, send us an email, and of course, tune in for next week's episode of the Working Moms Playbook on Wednesday. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode of the Working Moms Playbook. And also, thank you so much for sharing this episode with any and every working mom who might benefit. Also, thank you for subscribing. It means so much to be able to continue to grow this village of working moms in a world where our villages can feel fairly small. Keep an eye out for next week's episode, always debuting on a Wednesday, and I can't wait to see you there.